What's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and today we're going to talk about Dutch band CARACH ANGREN and their 6th album, Franckensteina Strataemontanus via Season of Mist Records. But before I do that, if you like to stay up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. I upload new content every single week. Now, if you're not aware of CARACH ANGREN, they're known for their conceptual symphonic black metal albums, and this one is their own personal creative take on the Frankenstein story, along with mixing in elements of like a German serial killer, British military during World War II, and a 13th century Holy Roman Emperor. So there's definitely quite a bit going on here, and CARACH ANGREN has been a band that over the years I've always previously been intrigued with and kind of like really want to love really, but just have never been fully sold on any particular album.
Not quite my tempo. It's all good, no worries.
There were moments on the previous one, Dance and Laugh Amongst the Rotten, that again, I was interested by, and I was like, oh, this is a really cool song, and it sucked me in, but then I listened to the album, and it's just a lot of inconsistency. Same with This Is No Fairy Tale, which is the album that initially made me aware of the band to begin with. I was very intrigued by the weird staccato vocals and the conceptual elements again, but it was just like too campy, too ridiculous, but still, something just kept me coming back to them ever since that moment. And even going back through their earlier discography to the classic Death Came Through a Phantom Ship, which is probably most commonly cited as their best album, I'm just not quite fully there. But that all changes with Franckensteina Strataemontanus because I really love this album. I think it's probably the best thing that they've done so far, and at least it's the most consistent. Every single song on this album is excellent. I could pick anyone out of a hat and have a good time, which is something I have not been able to say about any of their previous albums. For me personally, I know there are going to be people out there in the comments who feel differently, and by all means, speak your mind. And the atmosphere is just amazing. That's always been like a core element of this band. But yeah, the intro sets this great tone, and there's this subtle shift as he's talking about this idyllic morning of this little boy who is like having a nice day out in the park, and then you hear it shift to this minor key, and it becomes this more ominous, dark affair as you find out he's getting sick, and he's taken on some sort of illness, and ultimately dies, and the parents bury him, and then it sets up this whole thing that this boy gets turned into a little Frankenstein, so to speak.
Little did they know what horrors were about to come.
Scourged Ghoul, the first proper track on the album, is probably the best opener I think they've ever done, which is saying a lot because they've had some pretty decent openers. Again, very conceptual, but never at the expense of the composition. That is the theme of this album, is that it feels very much like the music comes first. And what results are some very enjoyable and just engaging songwriting experiences that you can really get wrapped up in and have a nice flow, a nice pacing. The title track, though, is the crown jewel here. This is potentially the best song they've ever written, I think, and it's just so dang catchy. Like, I sing along to so much of this, from that great growled refrain of to the clean sung elements, which they've really kind of spread their wings on those on this album, and they came out very well. I've had a lot of complaints lately with albums really kind of missing the mark when it comes to the clean singing, but not so much here. The album's pretty stylistically diverse too. You get your usual very Danny Elfman inspired symphonic flourishes that are as fun as ever. I think these are also some of the best written orchestral arrangements that they've had to date. But then there's some more like oddball instrument moments too, especially the standout like rocking guitar hook on The Necromancer, which caught me off guard and I wasn't sure how I felt about it when I first heard it, but let me tell you, that song comes on now on repeat listens and I'm just immediately bobbing my head to it. There's just something so infectious about it. And again, a lot of moments on this album that are things that I have not been able to say about anything I've previously listened to from CARACH ANGREN. Operation Compass is solid too. This is a slower song, but it reminds me a lot. The more I was listening to it, I'm like, I feel like I've heard this before. And I realized it's very similar to on the Flesh God Apocalypse album King, but something about subtle changes they've done to it here just work for me. I've definitely grown to love the lead single on this album, Monster, which was another one when I first heard it, I was kind of like, I don't know, maybe a little bit too campy here, but that drum intro is so fantastic. And with the little screechy violin too. It's just so cool. There's a lot of different textures going on here. And again, that adds to the engagement factor. There's a lot of dynamics. And so these standout little moments actually stick with you. And that's such a primary complaint I have of a lot of albums that I don't like, is that there aren't those standout moments. Everything kind of feels very uniform and kind of dull. There's not enough different stuff going on. And so Monster in particular stands out in that realm. And beyond just that great drum intro, there's kind of like this Rammstein-esque guitar going on too, and some very funky bass groove as well. I mean, really in general, the bass work on this album is fantastic. Like, it would be easy to kind of miss it amidst all of the really flamboyant, again, orchestral string arrangements and some of the guitar work and the very, again, you know, staccato, standout black metal vocals. But really, like, sit and give it a listen just focusing on the bass work, and I think you'll be impressed with some of the grooves, some of the runs. There's a lot going on. What it illustrates is that every musician on this album does a full-time job. Like, they really gave it their all, and it pays off. And going back to the vocals, again, I've had complaints in the past where I feel like it can get too campy. It can kind of like jump the shark a little too much. But on here, it strikes a pretty good balance. It maintains that very signature quality to it where you hear CARACH ANGREN vocals and you immediately know who it is. But here, it just feels more balanced, more polished. Honestly, they even managed to pull at my heartstrings a little bit at times without getting too cheesy, which is definitely something I did not expect. Particularly, there's this mournful solo violin on Sown in Solitude that just really kind of, I get caught up in that moment. There's something very just sad about it, and I feel that. But yeah, those are some of my favorite moments, but even in between, like, they just do a good job of maintaining my attention. There's no moment on here where I was bored or cringing or whatever. Like, that's a massive improvement. There are some moments where I feel like there are some minor dips in the production quality, some minor dips in the compositional kind of intrigue, but overall, like, it has a nice flow, it doesn't overstay its welcome, and start to finish, I've been enjoying this thing, and I've been listening to it on repeat quite a bit, and I actually plan on buying it. I've been waiting for that CARACH ANGREN album that I actually feel is worthy of putting on my shelf, not to be too pretentious and act like this shelf has only the best of the best, but just in my opinion, this is the one I want to get. Getting to scores, I give it a 9 for enjoyability. It's not quite a 10 because I can still think of other bands and albums that kind of get me up and going a little bit more than this one. Particularly, again, I think the latest stuff from Flesh God Apocalypse kind of trumps this a little bit, just because they also have the musicianship factor on their side. They've got a little bit more energy, and that just sort of appeals to me enjoying my more kind of fast-paced metal music. It's a 9 for musicianship. A lot of great stuff going on here. Again, I think particularly the bass guitar is really great, and of course the string orchestration is fantastic as always. And then I actually gave them an 8 for innovation, for kind of stepping up their game and pushing their sound forwards in a really positive way. All that rounding out to an 8.7. It's a B+ for CARACH ANGREN and Franckensteina Strataemontanus. Get it via Season of Mist. But let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm really interested to hear what you thought about this album, what you think about my thoughts on the previous album, and what's your favorite release from CARACH ANGREN. Let's get a conversation started. And again, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment, because that lets YouTube know to share it out to other people. And I talk about these kind of bigger bands to draw in an audience, but ultimately then I want to convert those audience members into fans of the underground albums that I cover in my album roundups, my other single album reviews, and then also there's tier lists, there's podcasts talking to these very talented musicians. So stick around after this one, because there's plenty more videos to check out. Also in the description you can find links to our social media, the email newsletter, and if you want to make that extra leap to becoming a supporter, then you can check out our Patreon and Subscribe Star. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.